If you're watching this on the day it comes out, it's hopefully January 1st of 2023. And if you're anything like me, you are very excitedly planning your sewing projects for next year. I have a number of things I'm really excited about, and some of them I've already started on that I'll be featuring in future videos. If you watched this channel previously, you've probably noticed that I'm just coming back from a hiatus. Well, for personal health reasons, I had to step away. And I've made a lot of progress in how I feel, finally feeling good enough to get back on camera. But I really want to keep that momentum. So instead of setting 2023 resolutions or sewing goals, I have a completely different approach this year. I'd like to think about ways that I can spend more time in the studio doing what I love. And some of that means goals for inside the studio and sewing projects, and some of that's goals in my day-to-day life. I've mentioned a couple times on here before that I suffer from chronic migraines, and that eventually culminated in a diagnosis of hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. For me, what this means is that my life needs to look really different. I spend part of every hour laying on the floor so that I can do what my physical therapists call getting out of gravity. Not really conducive to sewing, is it? Except that it is. I recognize that we all have limitations on what we can do in any given day, and that one of the ways to get to spend more time in the studio and enjoy more of that time is by going ahead and setting up systems in our lives that help us do just that. So for me, my sewing goals look a little different. So this year, I'll be focusing on 5 goals that help me both physically and emotionally enjoy my time in and out of the studio. Goal 1 is to pick realistic timelines. I maintain that the most accurate part of the movie Cinderella is thinking you can make a ball gown in one day and then finding out you actually need way more time with that. I do this, and I see lots of other costumers doing it all the time too. And sometimes it can be fun to see if I can make this dress in an hour or do a one-day make. But if you have other demands on your time or a really important deadline, it can be really stressful too. Having the time crunch can mean that you don't get up and move around enough, that you just keep digging yourself into a hole, especially if you have chronic illness. For me, I need to get up and move around a lot and shouldn't spend a long time hunched over my sewing machine, which is a thing I tend to do in a time crunch. So my goal for this year is to either pick realistic timelines or don't do the project. If I can't do it in a way that I will enjoy it, then I need to not do it at all. Goal number 2 for me is improving my studio setup. Setting your studio up in a way that works for you, both ergonomically and from your workflow, can be a real game changer, because it can mean you're spending more time actually getting to do the things you enjoy, like sewing, and less time trying to find the pincushion. It can also really help if you've done things like make sure your tables are at the right height and your ironing board is accessible. That way, you're using your energy to get to do the things like cutting and ironing, and not using it trying to reach the table or bend over in ways that aren't helpful. I've made some of these changes in my studio, but there's a lot more I could do. So my goal number 2 is to do what it takes to make my setup work best for my body this year. My goal number 3 is to de-stash. I am convinced that collecting supplies for a hobby and then making the things with that hobby are actually 2 entirely separate hobbies. And I've done a lot more of the first and not enough of the second recently. I would like to make some space, both physically and mentally, to get to enjoy the things I actually want to sew. And sometimes that's hard for me when I feel overwhelmed with stuff in my studio. However, I'm not bad, and neither are you if you've bought supplies you'll never use. You got what you wanted out of them at the time, and now you can enjoy giving them to someone else who may get to use them. And regardless of how many supplies I've purchased in the past or how many projects I think I was going to do, I deserve a space that's clean and tidy and makes me feel like I can enjoy the projects I want to do now. That makes goal number 3 a very compassionate de-stash, so that I can turn this into a space that feels good for me. For number 4, I plan to make sewing as self-care a priority. It can be easy to get caught up in all of the things we have to do and all of the commitments we've made, both to ourselves and to other people. And often what we do in that situation is kind of push the commitments to ourselves to the back burner. But for me, sewing and time in the studio is self-care. And I've learned that it's really important that I make sure that commitments I make to me are as important as commitments I make to other people. So for goal number 4 this year, I'm going to start treating my time in the studio just like I would time I've promised to anybody else. This means that I get to make my sewing commitments to myself a priority and turn down things that don't match up with that. even if other people may be disappointed. Goal number 5 is giving myself more compassion. And this is true in the sewing room, but it's also true in the rest of my life. One of the hardest things in sewing and in life in general is giving ourselves compassion when we can't do what we wanted or things don't work out the way we thought they should. Whether it's a bad pain day, which means I can't come down to the studio, or ruining a garment because I cut it way too small, I deserve compassion, and so do you. And if you do make a mistake or screw something up, who do you want to try again for? Someone who yells at you and berates you, or someone who's nice to you? So my goal number 5 is to be the person who's nice to me, to practice kindness and self-compassion, and to remember that if I wouldn't say it to another sewist in the same situation, I really shouldn't say it to myself. So in the spirit of self-care and compassion, we're going to stop at 5. It's really easy to make goals, but keeping them is a lot harder. And 5 is actually a lot, but these feel like a good place to start. And hopefully they will lead to a kinder and more compassionate 2023. Wherever you are and whatever your sewing goals are for 2023, I hope that they are also filled with self-care, kindness, and compassion.